Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at something different. Tanks. Best tanks in Shadowlands based on multiple different parameters. We'll be looking at statistical data, which you could maybe argue that the more players playing a certain class in high level content means that class being better. We'll also look at my personal opinions in terms of which tanks I enjoy healing in Mythic Plus content, and we'll combine all of this to provide a decent overview of what tanks are really popular and good in Mythic Plus and raid situations. Big disclaimer. We're looking at high-end Mythic raiding. We're looking at, world first raid bosses in Castle Nathria. If your tank is not being represented here, if you're not doing really high-end content, don't get too discouraged. Tanking balance is relatively decent and only comes into play at really high-level content. So let's go and get started. We'll be looking at overview of every single tank, and then we'll talk about Mythic Plus performance, and we'll talk about raiding performance at the end. Before we're gonna do anything, I have to mention, Mythic Plus tanking is all about how many people have done high-end Mythic Plus. It is all about kiting. So all of a sudden, tanks that have high mobility, that have decent aggro generation, or are groups that are to do with rogues, hunters, because they're kind of in the meta right now, to do with things like misdirect, to do with things like tricks of trade. Tank goes in, jumps in, gets aggro, and then just kites. So there is a lot of this when we're talking about Mythic Plus, and let's go and get started with our number one, probably the best or the most played tank right now, and that is going to be Vengeance Demon Hunter. Now, when we'll look at the statistical data, Vengeance is going to be pretty much topping a lot of the things in terms of representation for Mythic Plus, in terms of representation for some of the world first skills. Why is Vengeance Demon Hunter so strong all of a sudden? First of all, in raid situations, you need that Chaos Brand 5% magical debuff. You could get it through Havoc Demon Hunter, but Havoc is being somewhat mid-tier right now. A lot of guilds end up using Vengeance instead. Vengeance at the end of the day is relatively tanky, or is actually quite tanky, and to do with the fact that their mobility is so high. In Mythic Plus, they can kite for days. And if you're looking at some of the keys, like for example, if you're doing Fortified, if you're doing Necrotic, you will have to jump around all the time. And Vengeance is insanely good at that. Coupled with the fact that their AoE damage or DPS in general is pretty strong, their utility is pretty strong, Vengeance is solidly staying at the top of tanks at this given point. Coupled with the fact that their main mitigation mechanic is Demon Spikes, coupled with a lot of big defensives, Vengeance Demon Hunter is looking very strong in Shadowlands, and it's looking to be staying at the top. Maybe there's going to be nerfs, I'm not 100% sure, but if there is a candidate right now, Vengeance is definitely up there. Now let's go and have a look at Brewmaster Monk. If we look at the statistical data later on, we could say that Brewmaster is arguably the second most popular tank in all of content. In Mythic Plus they're doing quite well, and in raids they're one of the most popular tanks, but some of the top end world first guilds did not choose to bring in a Brewmaster, and we'll talk about that. But what is the strengths of Brewmaster? First of all, the main reason to play a Brewmaster is Stagger. For the people who don't know what Stagger is just such an iconic spell to monks, and all of a sudden it prevents a monk from getting that one shot, or one shot happening, when other tank would probably die. But this ability and monks in general have received quite a few nerfs during Shadowlands beta, and I would say that Brewmaster is actually relatively squishy right now. Coupled with the fact that their base HP is the lowest, you probably can see Brewmasters getting chunked by quite a bit, even with Stagger. But regardless of the nerfs, Brewmaster is still sitting in a good second position right now in terms of what they provide. They still give you that Mystic Touch 5% physical damage debuff that is mandatory in raids. And again, if you don't have a Windwalker, which is quite relatively popular right now, but if you don't have a Windwalker or a Mistweaver Monk, you're gonna have to bring a Brewmaster. In Mythic Plus situation, if you play with a good Brewmaster, you'll notice that Ring of Peace is absolutely overpowered. Whether you're dealing with Necrotic, whether you're dealing with Spiderfoot, it is just such a versatile ability. Ring of Peace is the MVP under the right circumstances. Like I mentioned before, good utility and really good mobility. There is a pattern here. The top Mythic Plus tanks have good mobility. You have things like, Roll Transcendence, and again, Brewmaster, even though way more squishier than it was in BFA, is still sitting in a nice spot in Shadowlands. Now let's go and have a look at Prot Paladin, and honestly, there was a huge amount of hype towards Protection Paladin in Shadowlands beta, and I think they fell short. I think there were quite a few nerfs that happened to them. generally speaking, I think Prot Paladin, the representation you'll see later on in terms of Mythic Plus and raids, it's not great. Even though I would consider Prot Paladin to be one of the best tanks for lower end keys because of their utility. Their self-healing and off-healing through things like World of Glory are insane. You can actually carry a group if your healer is underperforming or something as a Prot Paladin. You can really carry the group. On top of the insane utility with things like Lay of Hands and things like Bop, you're looking at a tank that has tools for a lot of different situations. But there's still a lot of issues with Prot Paladin to do with their mitigation, to do with their survivability. Shield of Righteous, once that drops, you need to get the heck out of there. Otherwise, you're gonna die. Prot Paladin could be regarded as one of the squishiest tanks at this given moment by a lot of other places, not just me. Prot Paladin will have to kite, and their mobility is not that amazing when you compare it to something like a Vengeance or a Brewmaster Monk. So all of a sudden, combine this in high keys, you can have a hard time. I'm not saying you can't do it, you just might have a harder time than other tanks in general. And in raids, you definitely want to bring a Paladin in order to get Devotion Aura, which is going to reduce damage taken by 3%, and he has a really large radius. All of a sudden, because Holy Paladin was really popular at high-end Mythic Castle Nathria, you didn't really need to bring a Prot Paladin to fill that gap, and there wasn't a lot of Prot Paladins included in that World First race. But at the same time, I think Prot Paladin is such a fun tank to be grouped with, because they can really carry the group with their utility and with their off-healing. Let's go and have a look at Guardian Druids, and honestly, in my opinion, Guardian Druid is criminally underrated in Mythic Plus situations. I think Guardian Druid is probably my favorite tank to heal, because they're the tankiest. When you're dealing with physical damage, I think Guardian Druid is top of the list here. Their physical damage mitigation is insane. They are literally a meat shield. They have a lot of HP. How do I say it? You're not gonna have a lot of heart attacks as a healer. So all of a sudden, Guardian Druid representation in Mythic Plus is not great. Guardian Druid representation in raids is not great. I think they're criminally underrated. I think they're far better than what people think they are. In terms of the utility, you have things like Stampeding Roar, which you don't have the talent into. You have Ursoc Vortex if you talent into Restoration Affinity, which you probably will because it's one of the best ones. You have things like Incapacitating Roar as well, which can be very strong if used under the right circumstances. Extremely high physical damage intake. Can have issues with magic damage. I think they're pretty good at kiting as well. So guys, I really think the overall representation of Guardian Druids is not a true reflection of how strong they are. But maybe that's gonna change. And then we move on to Blood Decay. Blood Decay received a recent buff, a very much needed buff in my opinion. All of the tanks received a buff in Threat Generation. I think Blood Decay Threat Generation was pretty poor to start with, so they needed this more than other tanks in my honest opinion. Blood Decay is one of those tanks that people find really fun to play. As a healer, I think Blood Decay has a lot more personal responsibility than other tanks. If you don't get your death strikes, your self-healing off, you're going to die. A lot of people on stream will be like, hey, Blood Decay is the best healer, it does so much healing. There is a downside to that. They're doing so much healing because they're taking so much damage. So if you take your eye off the ball for a second, you will just die as a Blood Decay. So there is a disclaimer to this. They do provide a lot of utility, especially in things like raid situations. Again, anti-magic zone is provided by Death Knights in general, but if you don't have an Unholy, which you probably should, a Blood Decay with anti-magic zone is going to be insanely valuable, and in Mythic Plus situations it's very strong during Prideful. It can really help out your healer. Although Unholy is in a really good spot, so a lot of the raid groups and even Mythic Plus groups might have Unholy to provide this buff. In terms of other utility that Blood Decay has, grips, AoE grips and single grips can be situationally extremely powerful both in Mythic Plus and raids. They have very crazy, insane self-sustain like I talked about before, but they have limited mobility. And in Mythic Plus situations you have to kite a lot, and it can become a big issue when your Blood Decay, who gets a lot of their mitigation by getting either hit or hitting mobs, when you have to kite, it can be really dangerous. So this is why you'll see the representation for Blood Decays is really low in Mythic Plus situations. And now let's move on to our last tank. And this is going to be, not arguably, but statistically speaking, the least played tank in the game right now, and that is Protection Warrior. I do feel that the hate towards this class is relatively unwarranted at this given point. There is a lot of issues with Protection Warrior. Their magic damage or magic mitigation is not great. They're still very strong at physical damage. They're very good at dealing with physical damage, especially considering that the last few bosses of Castle Nathria are quite heavy in that, and you'll notice that guilds, top-end guilds, end up using Prot Warriors in their compositions. It might be for other reasons, like for example, they needed a warrior to bring these class buffs, and I've talked about class buffs a lot, but you need that rallying cry, you need that battle shout, you're gonna have a Prot Warrior. If you don't have a Prot, you might, Arms is probably going to be the second best thing. So generally speaking, Prot Warrior, least played, very bad community perception, which I don't think is warranted completely. They are very good at dealing with physical damage, which, like I mentioned in Castle Nathria last couple of bosses, and warrior class buffs are very, very needed. So keep that in mind, guys. I do feel warrior is going to come back later on. Maybe they're going to get some buffs as well. So this is going to bring us to the next segment. The next segment is going to be talking about Mythic Plus representation. Let's go. So I talked a lot about the classes, and this is the data to back it all up. This is the 15 and up Mythic Plus representation in terms of tanking, and you can see Vengeance is dominating, absolutely dominating. The high mobility, the tankiness, the utility is just insane. Vengeance is the number one by quite a big margin, the number one tank. You'll see Brewmaster is here as well, which I talked about a bit as well. I do feel Brewmaster is a lot more squishy than it is, but he can make it work, especially with the high mobility, things like Ring of Peace. You'll notice that Prot Paladin is probably the third best option, but I do feel Guardian Druids. I really, really believe Guardian Druids are going to climb, and they're a lot better than what this graph says. Blood Decays are not insanely powerful or popular at this given point, especially with the fact to do with archiding and, self-reliance. And Prot Warrior is by far the least represented tank in Shadowlands right now, and I really hope this community perception is going to get better down the line, because honestly, I can't remember the last time I played with a Prot Warrior in Mythic Plus Dungeons. It's been all Vengeance. In terms of my favorite personal classes to heal in Mythic Plus, honestly, Guardian Druid is one of my favorite tanks to be grouped with. They're so tanky. Obviously, Vengeance is really strong. Brewmaster can give me some little bit of heart attacks, if I'm being completely honest. Prot Paladin is very strong in terms of off-healing, and I really like that, but I've seen a lot of one-shots happening to Prot Paladins when they don't kite, and if they don't have their steed available, it can be really difficult. So this is just a little overview of what I feel is really strong in Mythic Plus. Let's go and look at raiding situations. And these are Warcraft logs for raids in terms of this is going to be for damage and this is going to be for healing. This is not really a good representation because some of these are going to be cheesed. But I wanted to showcase parses, and this is the number one thing. You'll notice that Brewmaster Monk is the most popular tank right now in raids, mainly to do with Stagger. It's very, very strong. You'll see Demon Hunters are here. You'll see Blood Death Knights. You'll see Prot Paladins. Guardian is not really all that great, and honestly there's very, very few Prot Warriors in general. But what does this mean, and should I be worried as a tank in Mythic raiding? I don't think you should be worried regardless of what tank you're playing, because it is more based on the actual composition. Like, let's look at the composition for top world first skills like Limit. For Sire, they went with Prot and Vengeance Demon Hunter. For Stone Legion Generals, you see it was the same comp. For Sludgefist, it was the same comp as well. And why are they doing this? Mainly because they don't have a warrior here. They don't have a warrior, like a DPS warrior, to give them Battle Shout, to give them Rallying Cry. They don't have a Havoc Demon Hunter in order to give them that 5% magical debuff. And considering that Vengeance Demon Hunter is very strong right now, again, there's a lot of reasons to bring a Vengeance. In terms of Echo, they decided to go with a Brewmaster Monk and a Vengeance Demon Hunter. This is probably one of the most popular builds or tanking compositions right now. Even though they had a Windwalker Monk for that 5% physical debuff, they still went with a Brewmaster. You'll notice that their comp kind of changed on Sludgefist, where they were using a Protection Warrior, and in order to get that 5% physical debuff, they had to get a Windwalker, which again, they're extremely strong right now, so there's no reason not to bring a Windwalker. But you also have to keep in mind that Unholy DH are definitely the MVPs in terms of melee, in terms of raid situations. So now if you go to pieces, we're looking at like a top 4 best skills in the world. They were using the same composition in terms of using a Vengeance Demon Hunter and Brewmaster. They didn't have a Windwalker Monk to bring 5% physical debuff. They didn't have Mistweaver, so they had to get a Brewmaster in this term. they had to get an arms warrior to bring that rallying cry and bring that battle shout. It's mandatory. So you can see a pattern emerging here. You can see how you need to bring a raid composition based on raid buffs. Fat Shark, yes, they use the same kind of composition as Limit. You had the Vengeance Demon Hunter, you had a Prot Warrior. Again, because you had a Prot Warrior, they didn't bring a DPS Warrior in general. And they brought 2 Windwalkers to provide that physical debuff. So you can see where I'm going here. There is a lot of imbalance in terms of tanks if you look at statistical data. If you look at representation, you might feel really down. In raid situations, I feel it's more about what you have available and how to get all of those raid debuffs. In Mythic Plus, I feel the balance is relatively bad because Vengeance is really high, or is going to be, as you can see here, most of the top world first keys are from Vengeance. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the class representation or tank representation in Mythic Plus and raids? I've talked about some of my favorite tanks to heal. I really, like I mentioned again, I think Guardian is going to climb in Mythic Plus. I think they're criminally underrated. I think certain other tanks need buffs because their community perception is really bad. Keep in mind that community perception can change. Sometimes it takes weeks, maybe even months for meta to develop. And all of a sudden, maybe the top end Mythic Plus pushers be like, hey, man, we missed out on this certain class. They're going to be really strong. So keep that in mind as well. Guys, let me know how you feel about this video in general. Let me know if you like this. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And I'll see you in my next